So we'll start from the beginning, and it's just going to be vocal, and I'm going to start by working on the tone of the voice. So in this case, it feels like it has a little excess on the very low end. So I'm going to take the very bottom off. And then I decided to add a little bit of extra bite in the upper mid-range. At this point, I think it was 5.4 kilohertz, dB and a half or thereabouts. And then on listening, it also feels like it needs a little bit of compression. Though it looks like the first thing I'm going to do is add a de-esser. And in this case, I'm using the Waves Renaissance de-esser. I'm starting with a split preset and then adjusting the threshold. And in this case, now I'm adding a standard downward compressor. Oh, sorry. But first we're going to go back to the EQ and take out a little bit of mud in the lower mid-range, just a bump, about a dB or thereabouts, around 200 hertz. Now that I've shaped the tone with both boosts and cuts that kind of I feel are more flattering, now I'm going to control the levels. Now with dynamics processing, what we're doing is changing levels over time. If all you want it to do is, if all you want is something to be louder or quieter, just use a gain stage, right? But in this case, we're choosing particularly his loudest moments, and I want to control those. And it's just a little bit. 2.1, a ratio of 2.1 to 1 is not particularly aggressive. It's just evening out the loudest moments in his track. Now, what I'm doing now is on the acoustic guitar, it's a mono track, but I want it to take up the full stereo field. I also don't want it to necessarily be in panned in the center, because then it's competing with the vocal. So in this case, instead of panning it using level, I'm panning it using timing. And so I delayed the right side by a few milliseconds, so it's arriving a little bit later, which gives us the impression that it is panned to the left, though the signal is equal levels left and right. The other thing, speaking of levels, one of the things I'm doing now is adjusting both the tone. I'm going to try to get rid of a little bit of, actually add a little bit of body around 250 hertz, and then we're going to try to add some brightness, some clarity at the very top. Doing a boost all the way at 20K or at the bell curve, that's referred to as a Baxendale curve, and it can be a little more musical than adding a shelf. So now I'm going to go through and adjust the gain using clip gain throughout to make sure that it's sitting in the right place. So I'm always going to be listening for what the track is doing in relation to the lead element. I've used this bass before. I happen to know that it's a little bit muddy. I'm pretty sure it's programmed too. So I'm trying to give it a little bit of character, some grit, by adding a little bit of extra distortion. I'm then going to try to add some bite in the EQ. So in this case, I'm looking for a place that gives a little bit of teeth, right around 1K, to make it sort of cut through. Now, and the way I've done that is I do a big boost, sweep around until I find the place that I like. I return to 0 and then do only as much boost as I feel like is needed in this case. I was also worried that the bass was just a little bit boomy on the very bottom, so I've taken away just a tiny bit of the low energy. I don't remember. I feel like later on I adjusted that, put some of it back. Again, my feeling is that its level needs to be controlled over time. So in this case, I'm adding a compressor that's sort of going to catch the loudest moments. And so what I'm doing is by adjusting the attack time to allow a little bit of the initial attack to come through, so it's a little slower, and then adjusting the release time so it recovers in a musical way. Now, one of the ways I believe I stayed with the auto release, which we'll talk about in class, but it basically uses the crest factor of the source to adjust the release time over time, which is actually can be really interesting. I've brought the piano up. The piano only plays in the it only plays on this out chorus. And one of the things I want to do was find a way to have it sit around the vocal. So I've kind of pulled out some of the energy around 1K so it's not competing with the vocal, and then pushing it at the top. So I recall, I think I went back and added a little warmth to that as well. The other thing I need to do, it's just a touch loud, so I'm going to bring it down just a bump here, right? Again, I'm using clip gain because I want to adjust levels over time. One of the big things I've done here is I started with the loudest part of the song. I started with the out chorus, and so now I'm going to make decisions about placement there, so that the song kind of builds to that to the mix, or it builds to that part of the song. There were two other acoustic guitar parts here that are really just sort of raked guitar parts. So I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to do try to add some brilliance at the very top. In this case, a fairly significant boost right around 10K to bring out the metallic clarity of the attack, and then take off some of the very bottom. That second EQ was a mistake, which I'm now correcting. If you option click and drag on a plugin and drag it to the next spot, it will duplicate the settings, because I wanted those to be basically the same. In this case, it's stepping on the vocal just a little, so I'm going to pull that back. Looks like I'm not. Yeah, that's what I thought. I wasn't thrilled with that EQ setting, so now I'm going to go and try to give it just a little bit of body, but below where the vocal is. So I'm trying to kind of find the boost above and below the vocals, but stay out of the singer's way. Again, always trying to make decisions that stay out of the lead element's way. It's a really a useful way to build a mix. It's also I've found it's easier or more efficient than starting with the rhythm section, right? Starting with the kick and the bass, and then building and making this amazing sounding band, and then turning the vocal on at the end and realizing you haven't left enough space. So I've brought in that little Wurlitzer, the little whirly. I really like this sound. I like the character of it. I like how it sits with the vocal, so I'm trying to find a way to make it sound a little more throaty. But when you make a boost, now the whole thing is sticking out a little bit. So now I'm going to take the level of the entire part and bring it down to just kind of sit within the body of the to sit properly in context with everything else. I think at this point I'm realizing that the on the outro, like right there where the fade happens, it's not really a fade, it's just an out. This part needs to come up, because it really is the focal element. In fact, it's the only thing playing. So I've now brought it up 6 dB at this point, and I'm doing crossfading from the lower part up to the. Now that, to me, that crossfade was too obvious. You kind of heard it surge. So I'm going to go from equal power to equal gain, which to me I think is going to sound, from equal gain to equal power, which to my ear sounded a little smoother, right? And so what are we doing now? So one thing to keep in mind generally is that just because you set something at one level doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to keep it there. You're always going to leave yourself the option of going back and making adjustments. So you might think, you know what, that choice made sense when there were only 2 tracks, but now as I'm adding more, it doesn't work as well. So what I'm doing now is those 2 extra acoustics. I'm bringing in just a little bit, because I now have these 2 other guitars that actually both play lines. I really like both of these. So I want to take advantage of those and make them, kind of help add the character or that extra motion. But again, I don't want them to interfere with some of the other tracks. So I'm now sort of searching for a place harmonically where there's room for them in the arrangement. and I'm trying to make it complementary. So whereas I did sort of a low-mid boost on the first electric, on the second one I'm kind of going with a mid-range boost, so that they're not stepping on each other. They're also not spectrally on top of each other. From an image-wise on top of each other. They have been panned off a little bit left and right. Having left and right channels means I can have information that would, if it were on top of each other, it would be competing. But if I can physically separate them, now they're not going to step on each other quite as much. So in this moment, I'm realizing that, because I have those other guitar lines playing, the acoustic doesn't have to do as much work. So in this case, I'm turning it down just a little bit during this section. Again, I'll be making adjustments to that level overall as we go. Each section will need to be adjusted, but right now I'm really just focusing on the out chorus to try to get that right. And then there's these big, more, slightly edgier, not really edgy, but just kind of these brighter lines that only happen at the end. So all the parts that don't play, I'm just turning those into separate clips and then muting that. And now I'm bringing those levels down to where they just sit, they add energy and motion, but they're not getting in the way. I may have gone back, turned them down just a little too far. Obviously, we want them to do their job and create that new, or create extra excitement when they do come in, so they're not completely lost. It's always a tricky balance, and it can be the difference of half a dB or even less. Can be the difference between sitting in the right place, getting lost, or being kind of sticking out. And figuring that out requires patience and investing quite a bit of time on the static mix. Like right now there is no automation, but there are levels that change over time because of the clip gain and because of the dynamics processing. I'm going to spend a lot of time trying to get the static mix right. In other words, I just want all of the I want the mix to be able to work if I just hit the space bar before there's any automation. So I'm bringing in this track called the bowed piano, which is kind of an unconventional part, but it has a lot of high frequency information that's really sort of interesting. It makes the out chorus just sort of lift a little bit. It kind of adds some extra fizz on the top. The other thing I'm doing here is that lovely little piano riff at the end of the bridge. I wanted to push that as a feature moment before it then goes into the big out. It kind of sets the stage. It's almost like this sweep that comes in and brings us into the out chorus. So same thing, I'm adjusting the clip so that the relative levels in each section are fitting together. At this point I'm turning up the acoustic a little bit and bringing the higher, just tweaking levels. You probably know this, but if you hold down the command key, this is on a Mac, if I hold the command key, my any adjustments become much finer. I have a greater resolution. Things change in 1/10 of a dB, so I can start to make things start to be a little more precise with my decisions. The other thing I discovered here is that piano build is cool, but it gets too loud right there. So I'm going to have it loud right until the end of the fill, and then I'm going to create a crossfade at that break. The one thing I recognized at this point is that I was just getting some overs, and so I know Bill Crabtree would not approve, but I do actually use a peak limiter across my stereo mix bus just to prevent those little peaks. In this case, I'm using the FabFilter Pro L2, which I'm a huge fan of. It's not adding any gain, It's just making sure there are no overs at this point. I'm also now adjusting the compression because I felt like it was a little too aggressive. So I've slowed down the attack time a little bit. I'm actually going to bring up the overall output by half a dB as well, from 4.5 to 5. Remember, when you add a downward compressor, what you're doing is taking the loudest moments and turning those down. So you've actually taken the source and squished it from the top down. So if you do that, it then allows you to use something like a makeup gain to then make the source sit, to adjust its overall gain, right? So doing a little tweak on the bowed piano. There's sort of a B3, a sustained B3 piano point. Sounds on its own. It's not the greatest sound, but it does kind of add some character, and clearly the artist wanted that in there, right? At some point, they wanted a little bit of church in there. So all right, let's find a way for that. I particularly like the Leslie part of it, kind of the fast-moving cabinet. So I'm going to try to bring that out a little bit. And now that I've gotten the character the way I like it, I'm making made the waveform larger so I could sort of see what I was working on. And now I'm going to, again, kind of like that little extra build that happens in the bridge. And then as we go into the last chorus, I'm going to crossfade and have it kind of step down and just sort of sit within the track. I really don't want you to be able to point to it and say, I can hear the B3, but you would miss it if it were turned off. That's kind of the goal. Use as little as you can, especially on a sustained part, but no less than is really needed. So I was finding that the loudest moments of the whirly were just sticking out, so I'm going to put a fairly fast compressor on there, not an aggressive one. You can see it's just catching the loudest peaks when the player really dug in. It would be it's just kind of catching those little peaks, so that it sits within the body of the track. Again, we don't want it to stick out. I don't necessarily need it to draw any more attention to itself than it needs. But I also want to make sure that we get the value from that kind of throaty mid-range quality from the instrument. So, yes, I had selected only the crossfade, so it was only playing that, which I didn't want. A thing that I will do is I want it to loop over and over again. So I can, that momentum helps me move forward. The thing I'm adding now is this thing called an Aphex exciter. It's adding distortion, harmonically related distortion, to just kind of give it a little extra teeth. I'm also, because it's now adding extra higher frequency harmonic energy, I felt I needed to adjust the de-esser a little bit. But you can hear it really helps him sit over the top of the track. But the big thing I don't think we've looked at this point is the, I think we need to work on the drums. Yep, added a little more distortion on the bass. Yeah, I thought so. I just put a little bit of that warmth back in. Now we're ready for the drums to kind of come in. So I think, if I recall, I started with the kick drum. Sure did. So in this case, I'm going to create two mono aux inputs because if you can see, there are two kick drum tracks and two snare drum tracks. There's a kick in and out, and then on the snare there's a top and bottom. That's pretty standard stuff. And so in this case, I'm going to create mono aux inputs to submix the two kick tracks, so I process them together. So in this case, I'm going to route holding the Option and Shift, so the the two tracks are going to both be routed to that bus. And I'm going to name this the kick and snare. And now we're going to start with a peak limiter on both. So in this case, I really like the Waves L1 because it gives me a way to kind of add some gain to kind of bring it up. I'm also checking to make sure that my pan depth in that case is correct. Pan depth that I like to use is 4.5. I wanted to make sure that that wasn't in a wrong place, or in the place that I don't prefer before I continued with the mix. Could have gotten myself in trouble. We'll talk much more about that in class. So in this case, the kick drum I kind of want more of the smack of the kick in and not so much of the thump of the kick out, so I'm going to do an adjustment. And now I'm going to do some tonal adjustments, so I want much more smack on the very top. Yeah, so I did a big boost to try to find the sound of the beater hitting the beater head or batter head. I'm not sure. I wanted the smack on the top and the thump on the bottom. Too much of the smack, so I'll dial that back. I think I ended up at about 10 dB of boost, which is a lot, and that's a big boost. But for me, 9 wasn't enough. 12 was too much, so I'm just gonna. And you can really hear that it really makes it cut through. So now I'm going to do a similar process with the kick and the snare. I'm going to do a similar process with the snare that I did on the kick. In this case, the snare bottom to me was was way too loud at Unity, so it sits like 12 dB back, kind of gives it a little character without getting in the way. In this case now I'm making those submix tracks the same color, and then I'm going to turn on the overheads. And right off the bat, the snare didn't sound right to me. It sounded a little thin, so I'm going to use the trim plugin, which has a polarity inversion. Now I don't know if you can hear that, but if you're listening on something that has a fair bit of low end, you'll hear that it makes that work. I tried, to my ear, the snare top and bottom sounded better when the snare top was reversed and the bottom wasn't, relative to the overheads, right? That's a quick way to check. In retrospect, I really should have checked the kick drum. So, I suspect in part that's one of the reasons I thin out the overheads, at least initially. Though as I recall, I reconsidered that idea. Now I did do a big boost here. I wanted to draw out more of the metallic part of that, so right around 9K, just to kind of bring out the metal of the cymbals and the hi-hat. I tried these two fake room mics. They had these PZMs with room mics and this a printed reverb. None of those sounded particularly great to me. At this point, what I'm checking is to see the imaging of the hi-hat or the overheads. I wanted to see where the hi-hat was placed. My personal preference is for the hi-hat to be to the right. Now, I could say all kinds of snarky things about, well, but it has to go there. But I'm not going to do that. That would just be silly. So, but I'm in this section. I can really hear that the hi-hat is now imaging in the overheads. It was captured hi-hat left, and I wanted to reverse that because that's my preference. It's my mix. So I'm now going to play at the loudest section, and now to my ear that hi-hat is way too loud. So yeah. It's probably 10, 12 dB too hot, so I'm just going to take the clip gain and crank this down quite a bit. Yeah, that was a mistake. Sometimes an effort to work efficiently or quickly, I end up doing something, you'll see that every now and again where I will, where a window will pop up or a sub window that will pop up. It's not right. In this case, I'm now doing a duplicate of the drum track because the other thing that I want to do is bring out more of the sustain of the drums. I really want the drum reverbs and the splash of the cymbals. I want those to last a little longer. And one of the ways you can do that is using this thing called a parallel compressor. So I'm using the Bomb Factory 1176. I'm set the attack and release times all the way fast. I don't remember if I went with 4:1 or 8:1 as my ratio. But you can, and there is no threshold, right? You bring up the level and it has a fixed internal threshold. So what I've done is adjusted it and then turned the output level all the way down. I'll get the sound of it the way I like it. And then I'll turn the output level down. Turn the output level down and then just bring it up enough so that it kind of lights up the drums. Now in this case, because there's no reverb, not a whole lot, there isn't a lot to sustain. So what I'm going to do right now is add reverb. Again, because I'm trying to work quickly, I'm not going to go on a voyage of discovery and try every reverb I've ever used ever. In this case, I'm just going to pull up one that I know, this one called the Revibe, and it has this really nice plate reverb effect that I really like on drums to kind of add a nice splashy sense of space. So I think it's the snappy medium plate, and so I believe at the beginning I just sent the snare. Later I'll send, yeah. Now I have to stop the session so that the send will follow the main panner, because I'm actually going to pan the snare slightly off to the right in the neighborhood of where towards the hi-hat. The other thing so turn the output down and just bring the output level up until it adds some extra sustain, some extra duration. It's like it stretches the duration of the drums. To my ear, when the parallel compression is done right, it actually makes it seem like the drummer is playing more aggressively, even though that's not the case. It's some of the magic we can do by manipulating dynamics, by changing levels over time. So in this case, I'm bringing in some of the percussion, and those are levels I'm going to have to sort of chase over time. So it's like, sort of 10, 12 dB. Just kind of adds a little bit of extra motion. Because it and the hi-hat are doing similar jobs and similar at similar times, I have panned those to opposite sides, right? So the hi-hat is mostly living on the right, and the shaker is now mostly to the left. And so it decorrelates the stereo image. So now there's sort of interesting different things going on left and right. And I've now brought up the tambourine. The tambourine is always too loud, even if you mute it. So I do but when you turn it down, because of the loudness curves, we lose some of the high end. Or I want to have it shine a little bit. So I'm going to, in this case, I pushed it up right around 9K. And then I brought it significantly back. Again, I just want that sort of high fizzy part to poke through. I'm really not interested in the rest of the source for the moment. I don't need it. I don't need a lot of low end from the tambourine. So where do we go from here? While we're working on the drums, we need to work on the toms. There are 3 toms here, 2 rack toms and a floor tom. and the two tom 1 and 2 are the high and mid, and then tom 3 is the low, the floor tom. So I have panned those just right, just left, far left. Again, kind of opposite of the hi-hat. I've now created a stereo bus, so I'm using a stereo mix bus routed to buses 5 and 6, so that I can process the toms collectively. Okay, so we're going to name that properly. And now I'm going to go through and kind of set the levels. Now, this is where it's pretty obvious that the drums were programmed, because the toms on an acoustic kit would ring in sympathy with the whole rest of the kit. There would be spill from the kick and the snare and the overheads. But in this case, not a lot of spill. Okay, I guess it looks like I'm going to be working on. There we go. Yeah, I thought it worked on the toms here, but looks like I'm going to pull up the second vocal. So, and again, I'm going to option and drag the plugins, and then the only difference will be the output level of the compressor on the double track, which only happens here. I'm going to set up to be a little more aggressive, so it's a higher ratio of faster attack time. The idea is that it's just kind of holding things in place. I think the other thing I realized at this point was that the level was so low that a dynamics processor doesn't work. It's not doing anything. So instead of using the compressor, all I'm going to do, I'm actually going to remove that processor. Remember, I mentioned that if you need to change the level of something, don't do it with if all I want to do is change its static level, do that with a gain stage. So I'm doing that here. I'm just turning it up a little bit. I'm also moving it slightly off of the center, so you get a slightly better way of, you can hear with a little more clarity the difference between the lead and its double. So they're not like exactly on top of each other. They're slightly separated. I wanted just a touch more of the parallel compression, because I'm really enjoying what that's doing, lighting up the drums. So the next thing I think I worked on the toms, at least I hope so. Yeah. So I'm going to make those bigger. You can see there is just no spill on those things. So, and they need to come up a lot. So I'm going to take some time and try to get the level at each of those hits. That was a mistake, and I've never seen that message ever before. I hope to never see it again. I don't know what key command I used to make that happen, but it freaked me out. So adjusting the panning on the toms a little bit, going actually a little bit wider, just to kind of make them a little more dramatic, because I think that'll make those fills just be a little more exciting. And again, I'm adjusting the gain on each of those hits so that each one sticks out. So you can sort of see that last one was going to be way too loud. Though there's a little pickup, bump, 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 like that. The and of 4. I really want that the and to come up. So I'm going to go in and separate those. I think I use the tab to transient to go to the louder one, and then create a separate clip for and bring the pickup up, because why use a dynamics processor when you can do it yourself and get it exactly the way you wanted it, rather than kind of close but no guitar. And now I want to add those same effects, so I'm going to use that same effect sound. Might be a little bit much, though I kind of love it. I'm going to warm up the reverb. That too was a mistake. So I am taking a little of the low end off, so everything below 100 hertz, but it was 150, just to kind of warm up the reverb a little. So now the snare and the toms are all in the same space. My personal preference is not to put reverb on the kick drum. I don't think it needs it. I think it stays tighter without it. And the hi-hat, I'm already mostly hearing that in the overheads, which makes it a little roomy. So I was looking for a place to boost because I want a little more smack and a little more body out of these toms. If you hadn't noticed, you really do have to have a talent for repetition. Yeah. Liking that. It's a little dramatic, but it's kind of great. So I think I went through and did the same thing with the toms. I wanted to test and make sure the polarities are good. And it definitely sounds better when those were reversed. So I recall that was true for all three. You'll really hear the difference when it's not working, or when there's a polarity issue. You just don't get the same kind of weight, the same kind of fullness out of the source. Yeah, maybe a little big on the verb. Yeah, I think that's better. Yeah. Sometimes you won't hear a difference, like you'll try a polarity inversion and you just won't hear, it won't make any kind of a significant difference. That's perfectly fine. Now, one of the things I'm after here is that on that floor tom, I really wanted to be more dramatic. So I've added this Renaissance bass. It's a low frequency, it's a subharmonic synthesizer, and so it's enhancing material. In this case, centered around 50 hertz, 54 hertz. I worked with an engineer, and this was one of the things he did for his toms, and it made it sound like a cannon going off. And is it natural? No. Is it great? Yes. Yes, it is. So I'm just kind of going through again and tweaking the levels. Just because you said it once and you're happy, you can always go back and let me do a better job. And again, I was moving. Yeah, that's big. So I was moving pretty quickly with the idea of trying to get a mix together quickly. Like I wanted to get work quickly, work efficiently, make sure that try to capture something while it's exciting, and then you can always go in and do adjustments later. The thing I'm doing now is because there were these wide swaths of time where these tracks weren't playing. I think it's more efficient to not ask the Pro Tools to play silence, right? It's still accessing the disc all of that time. So in this case, I'm going to alleviate that burden from it. So the thing that I did now was I started moving backwards, right? I had spent all that time on the out chorus, and I think I had gotten most of the tracks open at that point. See, now I'm pushing up the lead vocal in this moment to make sure that he stays as a focal element. Same with the acoustic guitar, right? Because it really is mostly just acoustic and vocal. There's also a keyboard pad, which I have not brought in yet. So now I'm going to go in and just again set up the static levels so that in each moment the tracks are roughed in. They may not be perfect, but pretty close to where they should be. And then I'm going to use automation later to make little adjustments as needed. I've also personally found that if you adjust the levels on the tracks, if you then have dynamics processing, it can actually work more efficiently, because now you've established the gains so well, so that the dynamics processor is just kind of helping you a little bit, instead of actually creating, defining the sound. So in this bridge, I'm bringing up that sort of moody pad to kind of give it some character. In the first half, it's one level, and then in the second half, this filter opens up and it gets much brighter and louder. So I'm using clip gain, adjusting it so that the first part of the first half of the bridge, it's louder, and then it crossfades. It does not create a group. That was a mistake. That was Command G instead of Command F, and so I'm now adding an EQ, and I'm going to roll off. I think I tried a shelf, and that didn't work. So I used a filter to remove everything above about 2K, 1.7K. And so what happens is it really rounds it out, it warms it out, it tucks it back in. Tracks with less high frequency information sound as if they've fallen back, and like they're just not as loud. They don't command as much attention. In this case, I just want it to kind of sit in the back and kind of add some atmosphere, but not necessarily take up space. And in particular, sources that sustain, the longer something sustains, the quieter it can be in the mix and still do its job. So in this case, I'm just trying to tuck it in a little bit, so it does its job. Going in and doing the same thing now in the break, in the second half of the bridge, the little extra acoustic guitars, 2 and 3. When they first start, they just start they're doing these little, it's either quarter notes, I think it's quarter notes, right? Chunk, chunk, chunk. It just gives it a little bit of extra motion. So I wanted that to be nice and clear, but then when they get louder or more active towards the end of the bridge, going into the out chorus, I had to do an adjustment, so I dropped them down. The other thing I started doing at this point is that these electric guitars have all these really interesting little lines. So I'm going to push these up, so that they come through in the gaps, right? Sometimes called focal mixing, right? So obviously the main focal point of this song is our singer, but when he stops between his breaks, it'd be nice to have other things to pay attention to, right? So we're going to kind of push those moments up in around him, for between his phrases, so that the song remains compelling. Every 16th note has something interesting happening, and there's no moments that we're like, oh, that was really cool. I don't want that to get lost. It struck me that the snare was maybe just a bump too hot, so sort of trying to tuck that back in a little bit. And then give it a little more thump on the bottom, so it actually has a little more attack. Most people think of the snare as being snappy. In this case, there was plenty of snap. I just felt like it needed a little extra thump on the bottom, a little extra weight. I think the other thing I'm trying to figure out now is what's missing. What have I not turned up? Yeah, the first half of that pad at the bridge is really nice, so I brought that up. And then we have and then the second half, now with the filter, it still sort of sits back there, but it's still a 5, almost 6 dB difference between the first half and the second half. And now I'm wondering why I can't hear that pad. Oh yeah, I want the big cannon of a tom right there. I also happen to hear during that previous section that tambourine is way too loud, so I'm going to pull that way back. Just kind of tuck it in again, so it's not getting in the way. So I'm going to make those separate. give it a little extra thump, give it a little more of the heartbeat in that moment. Yeah, that ended up just a little loud. Still kind of great though, but a little dramatic. Yeah, just kind of going in and tweaking. I still haven't turned the other pad up. In this section, there's two pieces that are missing right now. One is a, trying to get that second tom to sit in the right place. It doesn't need to be anywhere near as loud as the first one. That one's really nice. This one, as I recall, I turned way up, and then, but because of the way it was played, it was really meant to be quieter. So, yeah, tucked back in a little makes it do the job it was intended to do. Yeah, but in that section, the tag for it is Cal, which is for kalimba. So in this case, I brought in the chimes, and I'm going to do something that's a little bit of a gag, a trick. I'm going to use this thing called an auto pan, which is going to have it move back and forth, and I've linked its speed to the tempo. And so I tried making it so it was every 2 bars, it would go far left to far right, and then that felt a little bit fast. So I think I went either 3 bars or 4 bars, just to kind of give it a little bit of magic, right? As it just sort of sparkles, moving across. It's like you can hear it swimming around. It kind of gives it it just kind of adds to the change of mood in this moment. And you know what? We throw that in for the cost of the record. We don't charge extra. Now the big thing I'm missing right now is this thing called a kalimba, which plays right here. Okay, good. Now I'm turning it up, which is good, because that's the focal element in this moment, and I haven't turned it up yet. Okay, put that away. There you go. There we go. So I'm now going to shape the tone of this a little bit, because I really would like the clarity of that to come out. But if I'm doing an upper mid-range boost, I should do that there you go, do it on the upper mid-range band, just to kind of make that step out. Because it's such a new, unusual, interesting sound in this moment, I want to really make the most of this. And like the acoustic guitar, I'm going to do the same thing where I use a delay to create the stereo image, because I want it to be equal levels left and right. I'm also using a low pass, like a high cut on the delayed side, to have that sort of sink back into the mix a little bit more. And now I think I'm adjusting the level a little, and I turned it down, but then I think I ended up going back on that, because it's such a lovely sound. And instead, I wanted to add a little bit of weight on the very bottom. And as I recall, I turned it back up a little. Yeah, that's nice. It's such I love when artists, when producers make an unconventional music choice. Like using a kalimba here is an odd choice. It's like, not odd, it's unexpected, right? You would think it's going to be another guitar or a keyboard or something conventional. So they've done something unusual. So I want to really get as much mileage from that as I can. And the very end of the phrase feels like it kind of falls off. So I wanted to push that up just a little bit, do a crossfade there, right? So when I was mixing this, I forgot that the pads 1 and 2 were not turned on, so which also adds some nice character in that bridge section. So I'll remember. The one thing now I think I'm adding on the drums, I just wanted a little extra fire, so I'm going to go to the lo-fi and add literally a tenth of a 0.01%, 0.01 or 02 distortion. kind of give it a little extra fire. Hi-hat still kind of a problem. What am I doing now? It's hard to tell. I think because of the extra distortion, I needed to go in and do a little bit of a level change. I think, as I recall, yeah, in this case, I'm going to go in and adjust the levels of the high elements here. They're just kind of sticking out inappropriately, so we're kind of too much of the shaker, but we needed a little more of the hi-hat. So just kind of going in and trying to make the, in each section to do justice to that section, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the same throughout. In fact, having contrast between sections helps listeners stay engaged. When things are just static and stay in the exact same place all the time, it gets really boring. It's very boring from a listening standpoint. So I'm going to try to, in each section, make sure that that different things, different color tones or other moments come forward. So we get to hear things so it evolves over time. Another place where I'm going to need to do that is with those little guitar lines, right? Starting in that little instrumental section, there's the guitars, the electric guitar 1 and 2 start playing riffs. So we want those to really come out. So I'm going to push those up in those moments. Again, so from a focal mixing standpoint, there's always something interesting happening. It just feels like interesting and dynamic, that it's evolving over time. But while at the same time that nothing is getting in his way, right? It's when the singer is performing, when the primary focal element is playing, they are the star, eyes on the prize. But in the gaps, that's when you get to go searching for, well, what can we use to make these moments more interesting. So, for example, in this first chorus, that little Wurlitzer, I really wanted to push up because that's the first time that comes in, and it's this really interesting new sound. So I wanted to make that entry exciting. Kind of lift it up a little bit, and something like the acoustic guitar that's been playing for a while, that I can actually turn down. So I'm going to make that a new section and just bring it down a bump, right? Not all the way down, but just, it's almost like if we were a lighting designer, we're going to really push up the lights on the Wurlitzer. We're going to just turn them down a tiny bit on the acoustic, because that person's had their moment. It's not as a focal moment now, it's more of a functional part. So we're going to de-emphasize it a little bit. And then I'm just going to kind of keep going through and searching for lines that add motion and interest without distracting from what he's doing. Anything that gets in his way, I can't turn it down fast enough. Usually I'll just drop, I'm hitting the option and clicking the level for the ones that have been boosted to drop them back down to unity, right? At the second verse, the acoustic guitar 2 comes in, playing just that little rhythmic part. It's more sort of quarter note based. So I'm going to push that up a little bit so we really get that extra motion. So I recall, I think I turned the main acoustic down a little, not too far away from that. Oh, right. So I had to turn the shaker down. It was taking up way too much space, getting way too much attention. Same with that tambourine, just a little too loud, so I'm just going to pull it back a bit. And again, once a mix that's really dialed in, if you turn something down a dB and it's like, ooh, that just got worse, then you're really starting to get close, right? It's actually not a bad way to check yourself. Like, well, let me turn this up a little bit. And if by turning something up or down a dB damages the mix, then you're getting pretty close. I am not in that point on this mix. That's, you know, from a process standpoint, I would kind of do a mix like this, get myself happy with it, take a break, and go away from it for some period of time before I come back, or come back and listen with someone else, with the producer or with the artist. Though I don't want to play it to them until I'm happy with it, really happy. It's very easy to talk yourself into like, yeah, this is good, but if your spider sense is telling you it's not right, then you're not done. You need to keep going. I've heard people say, well, I'm worried I'm going to overthink the process. You're not going to overthink it. you're if anything, you have underthought it. You need to invest significant time to make the mix work. And if your spider sense is telling you it's not done yet, then you're not done yet. Mixes are forever. There's no undo once they're out in the universe. I had a client who said that mix wasn't, one time the mix wasn't released, it escaped. Once it's out in the universe, there's no bringing it back. So make sure that when it goes out, it's ready, really ready for the world. That it's what you wanted it to be. You could sort of see in that second chorus, I had the Wurlitzer when it first came in was loud, and then kind of stepped down to sort of ease back into the mix. Again, I pushed the kalimba up again. I think it's at this point that I realized that I haven't turned the pads on. Maybe not. Again, just doing slight smaller adjustments to kind of again make the overall tapestry of the song work. With faders at unity, which by the way they all are. So faders at unity, you just hit the space bar and it just plays. Like nothing else has been automated really just yet, not yet. It's the very last thing that I do is I do some vocal moves. Is this when I realize I haven't turned the pads on? Not yet. Maybe. Yeah. I mentioned I love the kalimba. I love the kalimba. I feel like it just does all the right things. And there's no reason to hide that. It needs to be and the vocal is only doing, oh, so he's just singing, like singing syllables. He's not, there's no lyrics. So we're not getting in anyone's way there by pushing that up a little bit. Okay. Trying to make sure everybody gets their moment. Making sure those acoustics get their moments. As we build into the kind of that big final chorus. So I'm still doing a little bit of cleanup here, finding any of the sections or any of the clips that aren't playing, just creating a subclip and muting those, Command M, right? Another track that I have yet to put in is the pedal steel, which I think I do that now. And one of the things I'm going to kind of do the Paul Franklin, make it swimming with reverb. So in this case, instead of using a send and a return, I'm actually going to put a reverb across the. First of all, kind of bring out that mid-range, lower mid-range, around 500 hertz. So again, the kind of the that part of the character of the instrument. And now I'm going to put a reverb on there just across that. And in this case, adjust the wet-dry balance until we get enough of the effect, but it doesn't feel like it's fallen down a well. We get that nice sense of distance. So that one riff is a little. I like it, but it's a little bit busy, and it. So I'm just going to kind of tuck that in, and then there's a really that really high riff right at the end gives it sort of this. Love the mood that's like how evocative that is. So now I'm going to go through and adjust the level for each of those little riffs. That first one's just a little loud, so I think I'm going to create a separate region there, or maybe just turn it down from the beginning. Yeah. And then I'm using the tab to transient to kind of bring it up to the next riff. That works. That one I turned down because those high notes are right while he's singing, and they start to step on his vocal performance. But there's a gap there, so that can come up, and it probably it gives it some nice motion right there. Same again, the player put those little licks in the gaps. Now that one, it's in a gap, but it's because of where it's played in its range. It kind of sticks out a little bit. There's that little guitar riff. I think I wanted to turn that up. Yeah, right there. Create just a separate clip for that moment, and then push that up. And then even though that one potentially conflicts with his voice, it's just so interesting. I've decided to make it a little bit louder. Yeah, these riffs don't need to be so loud. I'm pushing this one up a little bit, but they don't need to be so loud because this is kind of a quieter section, and the kalimba is kind of having its moment here, right? Especially in the first half. The one thing I have found is that it's very easy using clip gain to create these sort of jarring, sudden level changes. So ways to avoid that are if you have a change, and it's especially if it's in the middle of the phrase, by crossfading that, it makes that level shift far less noticeable. It just feels we're more accepting of it as an audience because it just works. It just sounds right. Okay, is this where I figured out that the pads are? Oh no, not yet. This is where I think I'm going to create some effect sends. So in this case, I've created 3 mono aux inputs, and the buses that I thought were available were 8, 9, and 10. So I'm going to choose bus 8, bus 9, and bus 10 to use potentially for a reverb, a delay, and a chorus. So I think I set up the first one to be the chorus effect, the next one to be a delay, and then bus 10 to be the vocal reverb. Because right now, it's really striking me that everybody else is all of the other tracks, like guitars, the drums, they all have effects, but the vocals are still a little dry. And so now he's not sitting in the track the way I would like him to. The thing I haven't recognized yet is that the that bus 8 is has adjusted my drum level, so it's one of the things that can be a problem when you're working quickly, is that you make a mistake. You can sort of see the vocal chorus track is adding energy from the I think the drum send is on that, which is like, and I haven't seen it yet, so I'm just letting you know that yes, by working quickly, I made a mistake here. So in this case, I'm pulling up a vocal reverb, which is, I think it's in this moment that I recognized that bus 8 is going to it's going to the drums, which I didn't want. So what you're going to see me do in this point is get rid of that sound. You're also going to see me get rid of the that effect return. So now I'm sending to bus 10 for the verb. The next thing I'm going to do is create a chorus effect. First I'm going to shape the reverb and remove some of the lowest part. One of the things about reverbs is that they often, it's like, oh, I like that sense of reverb, but it kind of sounds dumpy. And it's because maybe the original source has energy in the bass or low frequency register. And the reverb is, if you send that track to the reverb, it will, it's adding verb, unsurprisingly, to the whole track, and so it ends up sounding a little bit muddy or dumpy. So in this case, I'm going to roll off the low end going to the verb, and it can make it sound a little cleaner, a little less gunky. Okay, so in this moment, I have now realized that bus 8 is causing me a problem. So I'm going to hide that track, but I end up hiding all of my effects, which is I didn't want. So I'm going to go back over here. Again, this is the problem with working fast, is that if you work too quickly, you end up doing non-ideal work. So instead of a delay, I think I've decided to add a chorus effect. So I'm going to use the pitch effect, and I'm going to use a very small amount of pitch change. So I'm just going to use the fine adjustment and do like plus and minus 7 cents left and right, and then I'm going to add a delay on the left and right channels. Now, when you do way too much, it ends up sounds sci-fi. Don't want that. Actually, didn't want that. So I just want to add enough to kind of give it, a little bit of extra sense of space. And so I'm going to turn that down until I can just barely hear it in the mix, right? I'll mute it, and when it gets to the point it's like I can just make it out. That's for me, it's doing the job. It's just kind of adding a little extra sense of width and dimension. But in this case, we don't really need it in the on the lead vocal for the majority of the song. So in this case, I'm going to turn that off and save it for later in the song. The other thing that I realized was I ended up putting a double distortion on a parallel compression channel, which is not what I had in mind. So, and I don't think I ever caught that. Which is one of the reasons that the high end suddenly kind of lit up on the drums. I meant to do that. I'll always check my effects. I'll let it in context. I'll turn them off and make sure that I haven't done too much or too little. I want to make sure, because often it's one of the things that we're going to choose to do later. It can be easy to do too much because it's for the novelty of it. So looks like I'm getting ready to do an automation pass. So I've now engaged the fader, and now I'm going to do a single pass all the way through of the lead vocal to try to catch, make sure all of the details of his vocal come out. And often what you're going to see that I really push up the very end of the phrase. Like the word tonight, that last consonant is critically important for the intelligibility of the source to come through. So yeah, I'm going to just do this, listen, and in this case, I've created that output window, so I have a separate fader that I can look at while I'm watching the waveform. So I have a visual reference when they're going to get louder or when they're going to get quieter. That matters a lot when a source is particularly dynamic. You'll see that with vocal tracks sometimes. Now I missed that particular move, so I'm going to back up a little bit and see if I can't catch that a little better. I can tell the other thing, I'm holding down the command key while I'm doing the fader moves, and the reason I'm doing that is so that it makes the resolution much higher, so I can be more precise with my changes. But it means that I have to adjust how I move in this case, how I move the mouse to achieve the moves that I want. In this case, I would prefer to have something like a hardware fader, either on a mixing console or like a software one, like the fader port, or like the S6, like where you can actually have a physical fader that you can use to write moves. It's in these tactile moments that I do miss having a proper console. But sometimes you'll find that you just have, it's like, well, here's this mouse, that's what we have. So learning to do unapologetically good work regardless of the hardware or the software in front of you is a critical part of being skilled at your gig, which doesn't mean that it's easy, but if it were easy, everyone would do it. So same thing, I really want to make sure that his vocal is nice and clear, and that it sits in the right place, that all of the little details in his performance come through. It's just one of those things that audiences are pretty forgiving about almost everything else, but not on vocals. And so there's ways that you can really make sure that things are intelligible, in particular that the consonants come through. Vowels tend to come through, they're lower in pitch and they sustain longer. Those, the longer something sustains, the more chances you have to hear it. But consonants tend to be quite short and they're higher in pitch. So if you want to make sure those come through, you have to do some more aggressive processing, both spectrally as well as level-wise. That can be mixes are all about the sum total of decisions that you're going to make with all of the tracks. You can make one thing that's amazing. Wow, that vocal's fantastic, but if the rest of what's going on around it isn't working, that vocal still isn't going to shine, right? So I think here's the moment where I've discovered that the two pads are not were muted. So I need to go through and add those to the mix. Fortunately, they are both pretty subtle. So in this case, I'm going to push those up. And you can see I'm option clicking the fader, bringing up to unity. I'll then make a separate clips for each of those, and then use clip gain to kind of make it sit in the right place. Okay? This is all for the static mix. You saw that for once I started turning on automation. I think I'm wondering why I can't hear it, as I recall, the fader is still down, which I will discover right there. Goodness gracious, I'm terrible at this. Anyway, so I reset it, took it back to Unity, and now I'm going to, just kind of adds that nice sense of distance during the kalimba. It kind of adds a little bit a nice sense of depth. And I'm going to do a similar thing where I take everything above 5 kilohertz. I'm just going to kind of 5 or 6K. Just going to kind of shelf that down. Yeah, I thought I went down to 5. Just to kind of, so again, it sets it back by removing that high frequency energy. It's instead of moving things left or right, it's moving it front to back. In this case, it kind of pushes it back and puts it, in the back of the stage instead of the front. So I feel like this is getting pretty close. Are there things to change? Absolutely. There's plenty of things that could be tweaked at this point. And of course, it could all change rather dramatically when the producer comes in or when the artist comes in. They may have very different ideas about what this should be. So, but at this point, I'm going to work on the mix to the point where it's like, you know what? I'm happy with this. But if you're not happy with it, if you haven't gotten to the point, if you haven't gotten to that point, then you're not done working. You still have to, keep going. So yeah, at this point, I'm just kind of going in and pushing a couple of things so they're not just tweaking their relative positions. Trying to find a happy balance between having that little riff come through, but not step on everything else. It's tricky. Make everything sit in the right place. Way, way, way easier said than done. And I think I found that the relative levels at the beginning and ending of the acoustic guitar, that the same amount, it's a boost of 1.3 dB, seemed to do the right thing at the beginning and the ending. So, and once you're happy, be sure to save it. And in this case, I'm going to save it with, save it as the in-person, so that you know that this was done right out in front of you. I hope this was helpful. This is, for better, for worse, this is how I mix a song. Yeah, I think the one last thing I wanted to do here was clean it up. Endings are critically important. You really, because it is the last impression you leave with an audience. You want to make sure that there's nothing there that's not supposed to be. All right. Just remember that up is louder. Get out there and make mixes that are magical.